So welcome to our hacking and unhacking another IoT device. So for those that aren't aware, the ACSC did restructure last year, in about mid last year. We changed venues, changed locations, and went into a nice new building and mogged in some extra folk, and we're all happy in there. And so today, Harry and I are going to talk over some work we've done on a project since that restructure, and since our mandate has sort of increased on what we look at the ACSC. So as Pat said, we both work at the ACSC, and this is the first time I've actually presented on behalf of the ACSC, and same for Harry, so go easy on us. We both work in Protect, Assure and Enable division, which is responsible for the uplift of security across Australia and doing research into security issues. More specifically, we're in the emerging technology and engineering team.
So yeah, basically what we're going to be having a look at today is we'll give an introduction to IoT, have a look at some of the classic IoT attacks that have been around, and give a demo of one of the devices that we found, and then look at some of the consumer advice that we've developed, and finally look into some of the vendor advice that we're going to be developing in collaboration with some of the policy writers down at ACSC. So what is IoT? So basically, you're connecting everyday devices up to the internet so they can send and receive data. This, as you can see, it's a pretty broad definition. So for our research definition, we decided to look into single-purpose embedded devices. And most people think of IoT in primarily the consumer space, with some of the common examples being home assistants, smart devices, and home security. However, this is a pretty neat picture from Beecham Research just showing how big IoT really is, and hits across all the main sectors. It's a bit hard to read, but we're going to break it down a little bit. So we've got the building sector. We see it across all areas of the building sector: commercial, institutional, industrial, and basically ranging from functions anywhere from office and education all the way through to airports and stadiums. Common examples include the HVAC systems. IoT's made this a lot easier for HVAC technicians to access their data and improve the systems, but also ranging through from transport and the fire and safety and even the lighting. In the energy sector, we see IoT being used more in all areas such as supply and demand, even alternative energies, and the oil and gas. So we see it in power generation, particularly in energy management, so using smart meters, etc. And also in solar, wind, using IoT in the turbines and windmills to easily collect data. In the health and life science sector, IoT has been pretty big, especially in the elderly area. So in the in-home area of health, using IoT to easily monitor the health of the elderly, and even telemedicine to help diagnose things before having to go to a doctor, and just for convenience. In the industrial space, IoT has been being used in the distribution, the converting, and the fluid and the resource and automation. So we see it in automation, in particularly the food and beverage processing kind of market, using IoT to make the process more efficient, and this, so the assembly and packaging. In the transportation sector, we see it both in non-vehicular and vehicles, as well as the transportation systems themselves. So air, rail, marine, as well as the construction of the roads, using IoT to increase the efficiency, as well as in the traffic management and navigation, so things like tolls and even signage. Retail, see it across specialty stores such as fuel stations. So they're often using IoT now to more accurately read the petrol use from tank to meter, making sure the numbers are right, as well as in stores, using them in supermarkets for point of sale terminals, and even distribution centres. Security, see it a lot in surveillance, so smart cameras, etc. In equipment, weapons themselves. In tracking, so used a lot in baggage tracking now in airports to increase the efficiency, as well as in public infrastructure, so using it to monitor building environments. Even emergency services are using IoT more now, especially in the ambulances. So they use IoT to pass data from the patient back and forth to the hospital, so they can have a record as soon as they've entered the hospital. IoT networks is pretty self-explanatory. It's internet, it's going to be connected up, so things such as your servers and your storage are more often on the internet, and PCs and tablets. However, what we're going to be focusing on mostly today is the consumer and home market. This is what we've been looking into. As Kylie said, we're part of Protect and Assure, so we're looking at protecting the Australian community. So it's across infrastructure, awareness and safety, and even most commonly convenience and entertainment. So we're looking at the energy management, so your smart meters. We're looking at power protection, climate, and appliances such as your smart devices. So some of the key IoT statistics. In 2008, the number of internet-connected things globally exceeded population. This has continued to grow. Even as recently as 2017, 2018, the Australian market increased by over 50%. This is mainly due to every second, 127 new devices are connected to the internet. And this year, 1.9 billion smart home devices are expected to be shipped, leading to more than 64 billion IoT devices being connected worldwide by 2025.
So that was a huge definition for IoT, and so, you know, as Harry's indicated, it's a massive topic for us. He said that in 6 years there'll be 64 billion IoT devices out on the internet. So that's about 9 devices per person, and that's really 64 billion IoT internet-connected microphones, videos, sensors that could be around your home, your workplace, down your street, in your car. So we definitely wanted to have a look at this. So classically, most people would realise embedded security manufacturers thought they could get away with security by obscurity. They thought their firmware is embedded and closed source, and that attackers wouldn't be able to get to it. But I think most of us here know that they're pretty wrong. So vulnerability researchers sort of over the past decade have been pulling off firmware and finding bugs such as, you know, just general buggy code or embedded default passwords that couldn't be changed, or vendor place backdoors that are in there for troubleshooting so they can remote in and fix your device. So we'll quickly go over a few of the major issues that have come up in IoT in the past couple of years, just so we're all on the same page. So Mirai botnet, has everyone heard of Mirai, or hands up if you've heard of Mirai? Yeah, so everyone. So I'll keep it brief. So Mirai was a botnet that attacked Internet of Things, so routers. It scanned IPs for Open Telnet and then just used default username passwords to get into the device. It was then used to launch DDoS attacks, and the one up on the screen is the DIN attack against the US telecommunications network. So you can see that outage that affected the US. Has everyone heard of IoT Reaper? Hands up if you've... Yep. So a year later, a more sophisticated botnet was released across the IoT network. Instead of using default usernames and passwords to get in, it used vulnerabilities that were in the routers. And instead of DDoS attacks, it just sort of lurked there. So we know this is a growing problem. This is a recent botnet. So back at work, we had a new building that we needed to break in. We decided to build an IoT lab, and it surprisingly didn't take a lot of effort to get to a point where we could start finding bugs. So I just took these photos before I left. From left to right, we have sort of the Google Home that Harry's pulling apart at the moment, a power supply, microscope so we could have a good look at chips and not, you know, do our eyes in, hot air, multimeter, a router there on the right, and we used the bus side a fair bit too, which was from B-Sides last year. We also have an extractor because I think Harry's made it smell a bit in there a few times. Almost set off the fire alarms pulling those. Yeah, these the chips on the Google Home are epoxied in. They're so hard to get off. Anyway, so we started extracting firmware. We used sort of, the similar methods that everyone else has used out in the hacker community. So UART has been pretty useful, giving us a console onto the device, seeing why it's crashing. It's actually what we use in our demo. JTAG, we haven't had as much success because it's not always available, but that will give you a debug option. And SPY has been great as well for pulling off firmware. So we don't only use it for IoT device, we actually used it here in this picture for a Thing client that had data that we needed to get off. So we've got the connector clip there and using the bus side and SPY to pull the firmware off.
So yeah, our plan was to do a live demo, getting into the Google Nest Cam. We tested this on Wednesday. We reported it a while ago, and unfortunately, it's now been patched, or unfortunately / fortunately. But we do have a video of when it worked because we came prepared. So basically, we used HCI tool and GAP to do this. Set the computer up to mimic a mobile device and used Bluetooth low energy to get in. We did a search, found the Nest Cam, and then using GAT tool we're able to connect to the device. Yeah, so the video here is out the front of our new building. So connect in, we're then able to look at the characteristics of the device. Using what we found earlier, getting into the device via UART, we know that the FFFD tag is the setup property. So yeah, we write to the command and then write FF, which causes a segmentation fault, and this crashes the camera for 2 minutes. So the live stream here will just continue, and then if we look closely, we'll see it jump to and have one of our colleagues who walked out the front and stood in the middle of the car park. And the camera doesn't track him at all until he just appears in the middle. But so basically how this works is the Google Nest by default is set to notify the user after 10 minutes that it's been disconnected. So by only having it disconnected for 2 minutes, we're able to bypass that. Being an outdoor camera, pretty simple. You could see people could use it for disconnect the camera, walk past, do what they wanted, disconnect it back again on the way out, job done. Should be about to come back online now.
So pretty much while it's crashed, you could break into a building or sneak past and do dumpster diving or anything you wanted that camera was pretty much protecting against. So here's Recover. I don't know if you can see Alex there standing out on the car park. He just appeared out of nowhere like magic. Our demo was going to be like stealing Droppy, and it would have worked well right up until when Google patched the device.
So yeah, basically how we found, Nest Cams was, they're basically a manufacturer of smart home products, thermostats, smoke detectors, security systems, and were acquired by Google in 2014 and rebranded to introduce the Nest Cam branding of security cameras in 2015. Basically how we found the segmentation fault, the bug that we were using, is this is a pre-existing exploit that was using a buffer overflow condition over Bluetooth low energy. Once we saw that once it came out under public disclosure, we decided to take a look at it and see how well it had been patched. So how this exploit worked was buffer overflow on the encrypted password and the encrypted password setting. And so what we went through and we tested was just seeing if anything else sent to it would cause a similar issue. And by sending just FF, we've worked out that it caused a segmentation fault and effectively causes the same crash, and you get your 2 minutes of camera being offline again.
How does it look in the recording? Is it just a still, or is it?
Yeah, so it just freezes and gives you a spinning wheel. So if you're monitoring, you can see that your camera's not quite working, but as an outdoor cam, you're not really noticing, and these do people detection as well. So once it's frozen for that 2 minutes, the people detection doesn't work. It's not streaming, and you can just walk straight past.
Okay, so given that we are the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, we wanted to focus a little bit on how big the problem was here locally in Australia and not just worldwide. So we decided to see how many people in Australia were commonly leaving their IoT devices exposed on the internet. So we went to good old Shodan. So Shodan is an internet scanner. I'm sure everyone's aware of this. Pretty much netcats out to IPs and ports and does a banner grab to see what's on that port. So what we did was we investigated the devices in the AU domain, but we didn't bother, we didn't connect to them, we didn't try to brute force into people's devices, we just are showing what's out there on the internet. So firstly, we looked at IP cameras, and this isn't exhaustive. I'm sure there's other IP camera strings that I haven't looked at. It was more just to get that sort of sense on how we're faring around the world. So I got 4,362 IP cameras are out in Australia at the moment online. We then looked at routers, and I think what probably stands out most here is the 370,000 TP links out in Australia online at the moment, which I think IINet and other major ISPs are giving TP links as part of their packages to customers. So what it shows to us is that most consumers are probably just keeping with the router their ISP is giving them. Again, I didn't find many smart TVs, but not exhaustive. I'm sure there's some out there in DVRs as well. But I wanted, keep going. So I wanted to sort of make it a bit more comparative because, like I said, it's not exhaustive, so it doesn't mean a lot unless we sort of compare the same sort of searches across another domain. So I ran the same searches across the US, and then I did a per population percentage just to see how we were faring. So for the US versus the AU, when we look at IP cameras, I think we're pretty much exposing percentage-wise the same amount, maybe just different vendor selections. But when we looked at our routers, we're probably a little bit behind here. And I will put a disclaimer in there that this is per population, so overall the US still have a lot more routers out there online, but per our population we have a percentage higher. Okay, so we thought, what can we do to fix this? So we had a lot of fun, and we've pulled off a lot of firmware, and we've fixed a lot of bugs with vendors, but we can't, it's not sustainable to do this. It's not going to make a big impact. So we wanted to do something a little bit more to scale that can fix more routers for people or more IoT devices. So looking at what people are doing on scale. So MikroTik Vigilante, has anyone heard of this? Hands up, yeah, pretty popular. So October 2008, late last year, a Russian sysadmin called Alexei thought he would save the IoT world and claims to have logged into 10,000 routers and patched them. And then he added a firewall rule in that would stop outside networks connecting in. On the firewall rule, he left a comment to let people contact him. He said about 50 people contacted him. Most of them were furious that he had jumped into their router and decided to fix it. So yeah, he wasn't super popular. But if we take a look at how this affects the security posture for IoT, realistically, there were 9,950 people that didn't even notice he'd done it, or potentially. In 6 months' time, they're probably going to have vulnerabilities in their router again, and they're not aware that they need to patch it, and I'm pretty sure Alexi's not going to do it again. So this was interesting, because then we thought about Brickabot. And so Brickabot was another IoT bot that went through and bricked devices, IoT devices. So not as friendly as Alexi. These people were trying to inflict damage. But we sort of looked at the net effect this had on the IoT world, and realistically, when your mum or dad realise that their router's not working, they're most likely going to go back to JB Hi-Fi or wherever they bought it and say, my router's not working anymore, can you replace it? So it's actually the net effect of this is holding the vendor accountable for bad security in their device. But this is completely illegal, so I'm not going to do this and don't recommend anyone doing this. Just sort of doing an analysis of what's out there.
So this brings us to the question of what can we do legally. So basically what we've shown is the MikroTik Vigilante Brickabot show that consumers aren't practicing good security hygiene and patching their devices. But what we need to do is educate consumers, and this is an important step to improve the situation. So as we said, we're protect and assure, so we're trying to educate people into good security practice, so we decided we'd develop some advice for general consumers. So we looked at the four main stages of an IoT device. So when you buy the device, while you're setting it up, while you're maintaining it and using it, and finally when you dispose of the device. So the buying stage of an IoT device looks at before you buy the device. So we recommend people go out there and research their options using reputable websites that provide reviews on the device. If possible, look at cybersecurity reviews. Look for companies that offer firmware and software updates and identify how and when these updates are provided. So as we looked earlier, the Google Nest, these are provided, once they're provided, they're installed automatically, and ruined our live demo. So look at what data is collected and stored by the devices. This one's more a personal choice for individual users, but it's about understanding what your device will use. So have a look at whether your data is encrypted, whether it's being handed off to third parties, and make an informed decision on what you would like to do, and even see if you can opt out of the data collection. And finally, think about how suitable your device is for its intended purpose, and be aware of the device's limitations and unwanted capabilities. So this looks at not going out and buying the biggest and best device when you only want one of its functionality, because just because it has 10 extra things that you're never going to use, this probably just exposes you more. The setup stage, obviously while you're setting it up, and first thing we say is don't connect your devices unless you need to. So this looks at your general consumers who are going out there and buying a smart TV purely because it's their right size and has a good display on it, and they're using it to maybe pop a few pictures on in their shop. So this device probably doesn't need to be connected to the internet, and by connecting it, once again, you're just exposing yourself. Change the default username and passwords. This is just common IT advice. Put it on make a secure password, and as shown by the Mirai, the default usernames and passwords are out there and can be easily accessible and can be used to attack your device. Purchase a secure Wi-Fi router with robust security and authentication. As we showed with both those two attacks, a common point of attack is the router itself. You can even take this a step further and set up an additional Wi-Fi network on the router for IoT devices only. This separates it from your everyday banking and everything you do on your network. And finally, turn off any functionality that's not needed. This can include things like cameras and microphones and even blocking physical ports. As we showed with the Google Nest, the Bluetooth is on permanently, and that's how we've got in, even though the Bluetooth is only used for the setup. Next, we look at the maintenance stage. So reboot devices regularly, maybe even at least weekly. This is because most malware on the IoT devices is run in memory. By rebooting the device, there's a possibility that will be enough to stop it. Ensure all IoT devices are up to date and security patches are incorporated. Then to turn your devices off when not in use. So don't just leave them on permanently, similar to computers where you reboot them regularly. And watch for a significant increase in monthly internet usage or your bill, and if devices become slow or inoperable. So increases in your monthly internet usage to identify a botnet on your device, while if your device is becoming slow and inoperable, can identify malware. Finally, the disposal stage of an IoT device can refer to either when you're throwing the device in the bin or when you're selling it on. So we want people to wipe the device, making sure to erase all the contents and personal information, perform a factory reset of the device, resetting all passwords and settings to default, remove memory of the device from other devices that were connected to it to prevent future pairing. So an example of this is the LifeX lights that were thrown out with the Wi-Fi details still on them. This is just an easy way for people to gain access. And remove any removable media that were attached to the device. But as we suggested earlier, a big part of the problem is the vendors not having good security on their devices to begin with. So what can we do to influence this? First, we went out and we had a look at what's been done overseas. So the UK, the National Cyber Security Centre and the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Support published this document called Secure by Design. And what this is it's a code of practice on IoT and basically sets 13 security guidelines for vendors to manufacturers to apply to their device before they can sell them. Similarly, in the US, late last year, 2 bills got passed in California called Information Privacy Connected Devices. These will become law January 1st, 2020, and these follow a similar thing where manufacturers, which they refer to as people who either manufacture the device themselves or contract someone else to manufacture the device for them, have to meet some security guidelines and includes, they say, reasonable security features if they have any intention to sell their devices in California. So what are we doing here? So currently we're working with, quite closely with the Department of Home Affairs to work on lifting the security of the Internet of Things. So we're going to have a rep from Home Affairs here with us today, but unfortunately leading into the election and coming up to caretaker mode, they are limited to what they can say and what they can talk on policy. So this involves both the technical and policy approaches. And we'll be trying to work closely with industry in the coming months to make sure any approach that we take has the right impact, and also working with our international partners to make sure that Australia sits on the same standards globally. There's also the Internet of Things Alliance Australia. They're a peak industry body they've been quite active in the IoT space, and they developed some security guidelines as well as some other work into IoT.
So in summary, IoT is prolific. We talked about some of the areas it covers. We looked at consumer today, but our policy direction will probably go broader than that after a few years. It's currently super easy to attack. And we have 2 approaches, so our consumer education piece and vendor policies. And if you want to reach back into the ACSC or Home Affairs to talk about the policy pieces that are up and coming, just hit us up at the break. Thanks.